Well, hello there, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Bill,
And I'm Curtis. And we
together
are
we are
your Geekdumb
Geekdumb
Prophets.
Prophets. That's right. Hey, we are father and son. You ever been confused about geek things and things that are happening in this world? Well, we're here to help you, educate you a little bit, and also trying to help maybe explain and how this can affect our lives and spirituality all throughout our storylines as we go over geek stuff today.
What are we going to talk about? I mean, we've it's been a couple
What do we
weeks now
always talk about,
since
Brain?
we
Pinky?
always talk about, favorite stories that we like, and whenever people decide to say that those stories don't matter anymore. So, we
They don't
decided
matter.
they don't matter. Thank you, Disney, for throwing out all of those wonderful books that are up there.
Not just them. Not just them.
Not just them, not just
Yeah,
them. I
they're
mean,
all doing it. They're all doing it now.
well, Disney also threw out so much Marvel storytelling. DC throws out DC comic storytelling. They just.
So we want to get back to our basics, and just we want to kind of go back a little bit. We've talked about the CCA code and the Jedi code and the Sith code, and want to talk about our code, more or less, kind of how we got into comic books, how we got into this whole geek culture in this world, and talk a little bit about some of our favorite things, more on a positive note.
Always positive. What are you talking about? I am always, always positive.
Oh, you are a positive kind of guy.
I like to be a
Posi-
positive role model for people in my life.
Absolutely, positively. What
No,
movie? Come on.
that one I don't know.
Abs- Absolutely, positively.
No, please
Oliver
enlighten
and
me.
Friends. Oh, come on.
I haven't
Why
seen
should
that
I
in
worry? The
forever.
Billy Joel one, where he was the dog. You guys watched it all this.
Oh, it's
Oliver and
it's been
Company.
it has
Oliver
been
and Company.
It
That
has
was
been
it.
over 20 years since I last saw that movie.
Okay, if you've seen Oliver and Company, hit the like button. Let us know, because we know it's all part of our background.
Oh,
Why should
well.
I worry? Why should I care? Don't you remember him walking along, strutting his stuff?
Oh, yeah, it's the dog doing that. I remember
That's right.
now. And
Absolutely,
then,
positively.
yeah, okay, I get it. But, anyways, talking about stories that influence us, that one clearly did not, because I obviously didn't remember any of the musical numbers
It
from it.
influenced me because
So,
I had to watch that every freaking day with
it's
Brooke.
apparently, and I don't remember any of it. I can quote
She
The
was the
Lion
one that watched
King.
it more.
I can quote The Lion King and Mulan and a bunch of other lovely Disney films like it was, going out of style, which I
That's
guess you
right.
could say it is going out of
It
style
is
because
going
I'm
on a spell, as a matter
tired of
fact.
seeing these really
That's
crappy
right.
remakes of these great stories that I once loved.
What
But,
did I see? It was
anyways,
the remakes of the cartoons that are live action that are not really live action because they're
all
CCG.
CGI messes.
Yeah,
That's what they
CGI.
are. But
Anyways,
anyways, back to our topic at hand. Whenever it deals with, stories, like obviously that one didn't have any effect on me, otherwise I would have remembered it. Unlike, say something like Star Wars, which I still buy old EU stuff to this day, old
this
X-Men
day.
comics, which I got them all right there,
Okay,
collected down to this format.
Star Wars storyline then in the
Favorite
comics
Star
or
Wars
books.
storyline. Ooh, see, now there's a lot of them out there. I could say that my favorite is Darth Bane, as I did mention earlier, that my favorite Sith Lord is Darth Bane.
That's right.
But in reality, I think my favorite story arc, I could easily say Star Wars Legacy, but I'm actually going to have to go with an even older one, all the way back from the early 90s, mostly penned by Kevin J. Anderson right towards about after the first couple of story arcs, but it would have to be Tales of the Jedi. It was one of it kind of followed that, Darth Vader redemption arc where you have this great hero of the Republic that falls to the dark side and then is, redeemed right there at the end before he passes away and realizes the evil things that he has done, all in the name of a greater good.
That's right.
It deals with these great concepts of love, loss, redemption, and it was penned, like I said, almost 30 years ago, and the artwork was fantastic in all of them. You got amazing characters through it that would then later go on to influence a little game called Star Wars: Knights of the Republic. These books took place couple
Yeah, I was gonna
about
say
30,
thousands of
40
years,
years. Well, it's about 30 or 40 years before Knights of the Republic. So you get a lot of references to these old comics.
which is
It
about 1,000 years before Episode One of Star Wars.
4,000 years before
Four
Episode Ones
thousand.
of
You're
Star
right.
Wars.
Giving perspective. This is kind of prequel to the
It gets into some really really deep Star Wars lore stuff, but it
That's
does
right.
explore concepts that were relatively always explored within the original Star Wars trilogy. That idea that someone can't be too far gone and is still very much capable of being redeemed. So
Ooh,
it's
one of the arcs
one of the
called
arcs.
Redemption.
It's that was the final arc where this the well put it into perspective. You've three major characters throughout this run. You have Exar Kun, Oleg Keldroma, and Nomi Sunrider. All three of them were Jedi heroes during the first Sith War, the first Great Sith War. And from that, you find out that Exar Kun, at the beginning of it, falls to the dark side. And he's
Mhm.
one of the first characters to kind of establish the idea of a singular Sith power. Goes on to conquer the Sith, wield their empire, and so his best friend, Oleg Kaldroma, has to hunt him down. While in hunting him down, he himself has to commit some rather atrocious acts that leads him further down the dark side. And then to top it all off, he does end up becoming a bit of a Sith Lord, goes into seclusion, and then his friend Nomi Sunrider has to come and get him out of it, and he goes on one final adventure to redeem himself and doesn't exactly make it out. But Nomi does view him as a hero in the end, as a man of good, a man of the light side of the Force.
The light.
So
I was gonna say the whole idea that Star Wars is consistent at least with the redemption arc. I mean, that's how George Lucas originally intended it. Was this whole idea that there's always the yin and yang, the little bit of good and the bad and the good, but that there is always the person is redeemable. You saw it with Vader and all that there is a point where they can come back. So that I love how they went back in the history like that. Like you said, Tales of the Jedi is the same principal concept is there, just different characters with more Jedis.
a
it's
lot more
it's cool.
Jedis,
A lot
more
more Jedis,
Jedi,
a lot
a
more
lot more
lightsabers,
Sith,
a lot more Sith. That's
a lot
right.
more Mandalorians too.
Oh, that's right. I forgot they were big time in there too. So if you
Yeah.
really like Star Wars, and mind you, this is Tales of the Jedi, like you said, that was written 30 years ago under Dark Horse. Don't confuse it with the current TV series on Disney Plus that's called Tales of the Jedi.
That just
They're
deals with
using that same title, but remember this is all lots of them, lots of different tales, lots of different tales. This just goes back even further. That has now been retconned by Disney, but it's still in the legends. It's gotta be.
still in
It's
the
gotta be.
legends. How
Well,
about
my
you?
favorite story you
What's
mentioned it was
yours?
actually, yeah, mine is Legacy. You actually mentioned it like that was something that you were tossing to. I like all the storylines, obviously, with Luke, Leia, and Han, but would like to go a little expanded universe wise. So that whole expanded universe is, I love all the Mara Jade stuff with the Heir to the Empire. All of that with Thrawn coming in, and that's where Luke finds his wife, Mara Jade Skywalker, and then Han and Leia have twins, and Jason and Jaina, and then they have another kid that they name Anakin. Hands down, that's my favorite storyline. I really, like you said, I enjoy Legacy too, because that's the same thing. It's the whole line of the Skywalker lineage, and that takes place 125 years later. So for those who didn't know, if you're Geekdumb, there's lots of stories out there for Star Wars, not just during the time period between, episode 1 all the way to episode 9, where Luke and Leia are alive. There's tons of storylines that take place, like we said, thousands of years before, which is Tales of the Jedi. all the way to 125 years later, where this is the great grandson of Luke Skywalker.
Well, tell me a
Because
little bit about Legacy. I mean, it's 126 years after the explosion of the first Death Star.
of
What
the
could
first Death
still
Star.
be remaining that is such a great threat? I mean, Emperor's been dead for who knows how long. Oh, and in this universe, they clone him once, which nobody liked that storyline to begin with. So why Disney decided to go back and repeat it, I don't know.
Repeat the same storyline over and
Yeah,
over
the
again.
most contested storyline from the 1990s being that of Dark Empire, and they're like, we're gonna go back and redo that just as Rise of Skywalker.
Well, and then but in all fairness, like what Dave Filoni's doing, he's bringing back what Ahsoka. So Luke Skywalker's no longer the only Jedi that survived, as we're finding out. But Ahsoka technically is not a Jedi because she left the Jedi Order. So Ahsoka's going to be still around. Sabine is supposed to be coming back in season 3 of Mandalorian, possibly, in definitely in the Ahsoka series.
Yep.
Thrawn is coming back. So all these people have survived. Even there's talk about Ezra making it. I'm like, yeah, I'm telling you. So there's like all these ones that are still going to come back. So to me, Legacy was kind of the original that they even went back and said, hey, remember Asherard Het and Sherard Het lived through all of this
Yep.
and somehow in the background. And I was like, okay. So, that stuff is always like, you think they're dead, but they're not. But that's what makes a great story. It keeps it going, keeps you interested, keeps you wanting to come back. But the important thing is, and I saw this one time, we were talking with, when you look at evil characters, the bad guys, they have to be likable to a degree to be redeemable. It's that old adage, you want to root for the bad guy a little bit because you're like, oh, I kind of like that person. I like that guy or I like that girl. You're like, oh, I think I could handle them if they were only good. You know what I mean? Like when they have the bad guy that is just exquisite, like I really like the bad guy in I know this is going to be obscure, Die Hard 4.
Oh
I
God, why?
I liked him. He's a likable guy. I like that actor. I can't even remember his name right now. But it's just like, so you want to like him. Like Hugo Weaving, when he plays a bad guy, you're always like, Mr. Anderson. But when he plays it, you're like, oh,
Hey,
but he's so
Hugo
good.
Weaving can pull off both a villain and a good guy and make you
And
root
he's done
for him
it.
in both times. Come on, he's Elron. He's the perfect Elron.
He's the perfect guy that I'm talking about that can be that descriptive. You want to have him be redeemable. So I like these
Well, you
storylines.
you wanted him to play Thrawn, and that didn't happen.
Oh, he would have been an awesome Thrawn.
Well, if
But
they had
that's where
actually
like
decided to go with Zahn's version of Thrawn and not this
I
muddled
know.
down version that they got for all their other stuff going on.
Well,
I'm a I'm
okay,
I'm a little bitter about this
right. And we
sometimes.
digress. We digress. We're going back to that first episode, all the way back. We can get stuck on Star Wars all day. Okay, so we're gonna go give you one. How about this? Favorite Batman storyline. We'll do quick questions here. Favorite Batman.
Ooh, that would have to be a little story called Broken City. One of these. So this was a story written back about 2004 by Brian Azzarello, and within this story itself, Batman it's just a down on his luck, digging up crime, murder mystery Batman story. It's as true to Batman as you can get. It's a crime story told within 6 parts. He's looking for a missing girl, ends up going down the rabbit hole of the Gotham underworld, has different run-ins with different villains like Killer Croc and all kinds of different characters that help him eventually locate this girl. It's a rather simple story, but I think that very much encompasses everything that Batman is as a character. It kind of goes through the gauntlet of his
Cool.
primary rogues gallery, but doesn't give anybody too much of a spotlight. It's very much about Batman and what he's capable of doing whenever he just needs to focus on a singular task. So
So this
I've always
this is
enjoyed that
good.
story. it's one that comes off the heels of another great Batman story that people tend to refer to
That's
called
the one you're talking.
Hush.
Hush. I thought
Hush
that was
is
your favorite.
well, I like Hush. The issue with Hush is it does the exact same thing that Long Halloween does. It's 13 issues of Batman running the gauntlet of his various supervillains in one way or another. Now, granted, Long Halloween eventually culminates with the creation of Two-Face. This one eventually culminates with the villain of Hush, who his identity was kind of left up to the imagination for a little bit. So they're great stories, but the thing that I liked about Broken City is that it was a story that was told in 6 parts. It was 6 very detailed parts, but 6 parts. And by parts, I mean 6 issues. So it's
Okay.
short, it's self-contained. It's not something that I would say you need to have a good grasp on the Batman mythos, as this
Right.
story itself is supposed to portray what Batman is supposed to be as a character, how he's supposed to act, what happens whenever he decides to focus on a singular task, and the level of efficiency that he has, as well as brutality and his inability to care about the criminal underworld whenever they have harmed somebody that he very much cares for.
Well, and I like this because this is good for the viewers and good for us too. You know, for anybody who's watching, that gives you some ideas of if you're trying to break into this realm, into this different world. These are good storylines to start with. You know, that's I like storylines like this that Curtis is talking about when they write. You know, hey, this is issue number 670. You're like, oh, well, I'm not going to know all the stories. Well, they tend to write six, either 4 issues or up to 10 or 12 issues in a storyline. So you can read a complete storyline and get an idea. So
Oh
that's what he's
man,
talking about when we say
they
like the Broken
they
City.
used to be able to do that. I'd say post 2000, 2009, 2010, it became very much a cinematic thing, and you would have 2, 3 years worth of stories that you would have to read all in order. It very
Right.
much lost its self-contained nature of storytelling, which is kind
And
of
two
sad in
years
all honesty.
and 2 years of stories would be basically 24 issues because on average, most comics are written once a month. So when you hear like Curtis saying 2 years of stories, it's 24 issues. So it's not like a lot of comics, but you do have to read a full couple storylines to get there. All right, favorite, let's see, Captain America story.
Ooh, favorite Captain America story. Now, my favorite Captain America story is actually 3 separate issues.
Oh
By
no,
which ones do you think I'm gonna say?
I don't. Well, my favorite's the ones with Brubaker. So
Oh, is yours the Winter Soldier?
yeah, all the Winter Soldier stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
leading
thought
into
about
it.
Winter Soldier. I love Winter Soldier. I love Brubaker's entire run. I actually have all the Omnis somewhere on that shelf. Of all of Captain America's stuff. But no, my 3 favorite issues are actually probably issues 110, 111, and 113 of Captain America. These issues were all predominantly plotted and drawn by Jim Steranko, who Jim Steranko later on would come in. He's one of the first writers to really take over after Stan Lee. Stan Lee thought that he couldn't hit a deadline, so more or less kind of put in a spacer issue, that being issue 112. And Steranko felt a little burned that Stan Lee didn't trust him, so he left the book after issue 112.
Oh, oh,
Sorry, after issue 113. So he only did
113.
issues. But within these 3 issues, prior to these 3 issues coming out, Captain America had his secret identity blown. So, like, we think of that now that everybody within the Marvel Universe knows that Steve Rogers is Captain America. This is like post Civil War. About 2005 is about whenever that started. Where everybody knew who Iron Man was, everybody knew who Captain America was, everybody knew who Thor was. It wasn't that they had a secret identity anymore. But back in the 70s, well, back in the 60s, actually, late 60s, Captain America briefly had his identity revealed. And Steranko's entire goal was to create a narrative that made sense, that made Captain America secret again, that his identity was no longer known. He had to go through and fake his own death and then come back resurrected as Captain America.
He didn't
The
go to Doctor Strange and make him cast a spell?
so no, thank God, man, I hate the magic side of the Marvel Universe.
Oh.
Sorry, all you Doctor Strange fans. I really don't care much for the magic side. None of it makes any sense to me, honestly, because they can't decide on
Yeah.
what the rules are. But within this
Changes
story,
it every day.
it's very much a self-contained narrative within 3 issues, and the artwork is fantastic. It's very much done up in a spy thriller, and in all honesty, Brubaker even admitted this. These are his 3 favorite issues of Captain America that he drew
Of course.
heavy inspiration for whenever he was penning and plotting out that initial run of Winter Soldier.
Winter Soldier stuff. That's yeah, because you're going into like Brubaker's my favorite because he tends to do. I got like he's one of my favorite lines right there. Velvet was the same kind of that
He
them.
loves his spy thriller stuff.
Oh, and he loves his spy thrillers with women as the lead too. He really liked this one. That was a
He,
Velvet was one of my
he
favorite
really
storylines.
likes. He really knows how to write a femme fatale.
Yeah, that's a whole nother line. Femme Fatale. He's got his. There's 2 omnis for that one
Fatale.
to make it complete. All right, favorite. If you can be brief here, because I know we're going to get to Transformers, but this will be the hardest part for you, I think.
Ooh, okay.
What's your favorite X-Men?
Ooh, okay.
Oh, you weren't ready for the X-Men one, were you?
No, no, because in all honesty, I was actually debating about talking about my favorite X-Men story, but then I went, what is my favorite X-Men story? Hmm.
There's a lot in there. You're
There's a
talking No More
lot because
Mutants. You're talking,
I
you
like
know,
the No More Mutant
Rise
stuff,
of
but in all
the
honesty,
Phoenix.
I have to say my favorite X-Men story is a little story called End of Greys. So
End of
this
Grays.
The
Okay.
End of Greys. I had you read this one because you wanted to know why Rachel Grey, the daughter of Jean Grey, the Phoenix, ends up going into space with the Guardians of the Galaxy and all that
Yeah, I was
stuff.
like, what is this?
But so this particular story arc takes place right after a little comic event called House of M. Within House of M, Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, goes a little nuts, and by the end of the story arc, basically wills mutants out of existence within the Marvel Universe. There's only about
Three,
200. There's only
three
about
magic words.
3 magic words. No more mutants.
No more mutants. That's what.
But within that, there's like right after that, the after effects is that there are only like 200 mutants remaining in the X-Men universe. So you have all your major groups. Wolverine's still around. Emma Frost is still around. Cyclops. The main core X-Men are still there.
Right.
But right after, the X-Men kind of go into a protective mode. And in going into a protective mode, they kind of let their guard down on all of their families. And there's a little story called Dark Phoenix, and within Dark Phoenix, Jean Grey, the Phoenix, goes ballistic and blows up a star, killing trillions of people. Trillions of people. It's a great story arc. I also recommend it.
All that death and destruction is great.
I also recommend it because it's a very, very human story that has human implications of, well, what happens whenever somebody that you love causes so much destruction. Why would you feel the need to let them go, and can you? So great little story.
Okay.
But as a side effect, the Shi'ar, this alien race that once viewed the Phoenix as a god,
You're bringing all this stuff in for people. This is a lot to
goes
handle, right?
it is a lot to handle, but it's also important to understand what's going on within this story. All of these characters come in from the Shi'ar because they believe everybody within the Grey lineage is capable of bearing the Phoenix and becoming the Phoenix. So out of fear, they go on a massive massacre, killing every one of the members of the Jean Grey family. And the X-Men panic, trying to do their best as they basically go about this family reunion, trying to save whoever they can. and they have to fight what they once thought were allies for it, to make sure that this misconception of what the Phoenix actually entailed, you know, wasn't true. Great story. If you like more of a violent one within the X-Men, it's great because it's just
Right.
nothing but action over the course of 3 issues. And on top of that, I gotta say it, Psylocke, my favorite character of all time, runs around the entire issue in nothing but a towel.
Wow, that was random for just obscure things. So,
Hey, I was only like
well,
14 whenever I first read this story, so I'm like, yes, this is what I
well,
want to see in a book.
what's interesting is you've tapped into close to my favorite story. My favorite storyline. You mentioned like going in with Brubaker, some of the things that happened with Captain America, and then coming out of No More Mutants and why the mutants weren't. They were kind of like off in their own world because less than just about 200 that were survived. But during that time, because this also goes back to, I know we kind of keep coming back to this, but the fact that you were, a manager at a comic book store really brought us back and brought me into this full-on love for the comics going beyond Star Wars. And I kept seeing this little thing kept coming through all the time. People turning them in was Civil War. Just all these issues that kept coming in, and Civil War itself was a main storyline, but then there was all the connecting ones that could come. So you had the Avengers had their own, and then we had X-Men and Fantastic Four, and then of course my favorite storyline in the midst of that one was Spider-Man. So what this was, the reason why I love this one so much as an ultimate favorite storyline for Marvel was the Civil War was it's not quite like the movie. The movies, the ones that the MCU has been doing recently, it's it's changed slightly. I loved this because this was for one, my first storyline. So I came in and read, I think there was 210 issues of
Close
Civil
to,
War,
because you read all of the lead up and all
The
of the
Road to.
Fallout stuff.
Yep,
So, what was that, the DVD that you ended up buying?
something like that. Yeah, it was
Yeah, it
every
was like a
issue.
it was like a PDF file of every issue that was included
Oh,
with it.
I'm sure it was absolutely pirated and probably completely.
Nope. So one of the issues is that this at that around that time, Marvel gave out those discs. They did it with Spider-Man, they did it with Civil War, they did it with a bunch of different stuff that's out there. So more than likely, that is actually a legal file that Marvel went, "Oh crap, we probably shouldn't have given these out because now all of these comics are available on the internet via PDF."
Yeah, but if you want to look at it in that regard, it worked because they've
Yeah.
been sucking my money for the ever since then. So that was 2006, 2007
Yeah.
that those stories were coming through. So I have been collecting ever since then. I mean, the whole idea of the Civil War, it did start with or was instigated between the two battlefronts was not mutant the
The
hero
Superhero
registration.
Registration Act.
Yep, the Registration Act. So in that time, most of them that were had their secret identities already revealed, they were the ones that obviously fell more towards the side of stating, "Hey, people already know my secret identity, so it doesn't really matter." So they were all for the Registration Act, meaning that the government would tell them where to go, what to do. So they were assigned basically like
Well, it was
police
tell them what
officers.
to do, but the biggest thing, like police officers, it was actually the biggest proponent to push for it within the story was actually a place to provide training for superheroes. That was the
Oh,
biggest bit
right,
because
because they were
part of the
was
lead
the
in to
sunspot.
Civil War was a rather messy story arc with the New Warriors that ended with the destruction of a school on accident. So that
Right.
was kind of the proponent to push for this Superhero Registration
Wow.
Act.
Yeah, I mean that could be a whole nother podcast where we talk about registration act versus registration versus not signing it versus signing it and what you guys think. But that would because obviously with this one the big thing was Iron Man was all for it. He's saying, "Hey, it's too dangerous. There's these punk kids that are learning all these secret powers or whatever, and they're hurting people." then Captain America's on the flip side saying, and mind you, Captain America was one at this time, as you said, his secret identity was already known as Steve Rogers,
Yep.
but he still sided for the side to say no, he didn't agree with the registration because then people are telling him what to do, what they thought might be good versus what he thinks is good, or it's that old adage, that whole idea of whether or not, hey, what you think is right may not be right for me. So there's that battle, there's that struggle, and then that culminated with the big reveal, because this kind of leads into one of my favorite storylines was the whole Spider-Man. And his personal issue with it was he was one of the biggest proponents, always has been, of keeping a secret identity to protect Aunt May, to protect Mary Jane, protect everybody that he loves. And he came forward and revealed his secret identity. That was huge. That was the first time Peter Parker had been revealed in this regard to the whole world, not just to individual people. It's that same old thing. Like, come on, Kingpin seriously hasn't figured this out. Yeah, it's like
Oh,
Daredevil and Matt Murdock.
I'm sure Kingpin knows who Spider-Man is.
Oh
He
yeah,
just likes to, let it loom that he
that's
knows.
right. Just toys with him, and then
He's
so
so large he can loom, and you're
he,
like,
he
I'm
can loom.
intimidated.
That's right. His shadow covers it up. So I love the whole idea of with Peter Parker being revealed, his secret identity from being Spider-Man, but then the whole culmination also leading up to Brubaker was writing at this time to the finality, is Captain America basically gives up and says, no, there's too much destruction, too much infighting. Because the whole idea that both sides are fighting, but both sides are heroes. So it's the good people fighting other good people. And it
Well,
was
and
this,
this was also the start of a rather dark time storytelling wise for Marvel.
yeah,
So it
getting
like
getting into the deep stuff.
you started out with House of M kind of eradicating the mutant population, and then you had Civil War that divided all of the heroes. And it wasn't just like a simple divide where we're going to do 7 issues and then get back together. It was a divide for years. The
Yeah,
Avengers were not the same team that you remember for, like, that story came out in 2006, and then it culminated in 2010 with in 2011 with Siege.
it was
So
Siege.
like you had Dark Reign through that, which was whenever the uh, villains started parading as heroes because the
Norman
heroes
Osborn was taken
couldn't
over.
get their own act together to fight stuff because they were just too divided over this issue that nobody could join forces. It was a good time of storytelling, and it definitely dealt
Yeah,
with the idea of like consequences. I mean, I'm not a fan of Joe Quesada all that much, but in terms of the 2 stories that kind of propelled Marvel into the stratosphere
yeah,
during that
we can get
time,
into that one
he
later.
did House of M and Civil War, was the editor for both, and man, are they still massive storylines that people to this day talk about.
Well, yeah, because the Civil War affected everything. Like you said, it's coming out of No More Mutants, going into the Civil War. It creates controversy in the entire Marvel universe. It was like a different way of doing a soft reboot. Not necessarily origin stories were changed, but it changed a lot of people's perspectives of
It
why they
changed
were
a
fighting
lot.
for good.
It changed a lot of character dynamics.
Yeah, lots of them. So, Heroes for Hire, all of those were affected by the Avengers, like you said, basically disassembled at that point, and then they reassembled during the time frame afterwards and became New Avengers and the Mighty Avengers. So the Avengers didn't even exist. They were split into two different sanctions. And then they had the Avengers Initiative. That was a whole nother line, the 50 State Initiative. So again, readers or listeners, there's a lot of storylines here. We're just giving you a perspective of what we enjoyed. The Civil War to me was a great place to start because it was kind of like I said, it's kind of the soft reboot of all the current characters until 2015, where a lot of 2014, where a lot of things have been changed again. So my favorite decade basically is the 2006 to 2015 storyline of the Marvel, but it all deals around Civil War, Avengers Initiative, going all, like you said, all the way up to Siege. Even Siege afterwards, there was Fear, Fear itself, and then Fearless. Those all came afterwards. So that's my all-time favorite because, like I said, it got me into comics. It also gave me that. At the time, I was coming out of pastoring, so there was a lot of internal fighting, the dynamics, even other people would look externally at the church and say, well, look at all the fighting, the infighting that's happening in the church even. What are we supposed to follow? What's our example when, we're,
Just
oh, do
sitting
you
there
speak in tongues?
bickering
Oh,
at each other.
yeah,
Yeah.
do you dance? Do you not dance? Do you eat? Do you not? All these different things. It was like, come on, get over yourselves. What's the core values? What's our creed that we're supposed to be following? So to me, like I said, that was a phenomenal storyline. It affected my life as well. And even that was a lot of Tuesdays and Thursday nights with you in the comic book shop bagging boarding, and
Yeah.
then reading
Yeah, there
all
was
those
that. It
comics.
was a good time. It was a good time.
Okay,
Wow.
so what's your all-time favorite storyline?
My all-time favorite storyline. So there's plenty to pick from.
I was gonna say if I was gonna say, can we keep it brief? But probably not.
It's
We'll
probably
insert here.
probably not. Not this particular one. And this particular
Okay,
story arc is only
so
5 issues long.
so pause. Everybody get a drink
Take a deep
and
breath.
go.
Okay. So
Make it
my
interesting.
favorite. No, I'll make it as interesting as
Well,
I like. However the hell I feel
okay.
like it.
They're gonna know who all these people are by the time you're done. Here we go.
Oh, they'll know who they are, and they won't care who they are.
Well, because it's not anything that we've mentioned before. That's what I'm saying.
No,
With
so
Marvel and DC and all these other things.
we've mentioned Marvel, we've mentioned DC. I could go so far as to mention Sonic the Hedgehog, which all of those white boxes there, all along the foot of my bed, are all Sonic the Hedgehog comics.
Sonic.
I could have picked a story from there because there's plenty that have influenced me and like my reading habits and what I like within stories. But I have to go back and I have to think, I'm like, what stories have I read dozens of times that I've gone back and went, I just got to reread this today. It's phenomenal. It's a great story arc. Some might say Watchmen. Watchmen's a great story. I personally don't care for Watchmen. It's not that great of a graphic novel. Sorry, it's a little depressing. It's very, very much an anti-hero story. Even though, if you really think about it, the main villain of the story is supposed to be Rorschach, and he's the only character that anybody ever roots for anyways.
So this would be no
Because
different
everybody
than
else is terrible.
right. So this is no different than I know people currently that will still say every year they go through the all seasons of The Office
Yep.
or all seasons of Friends.
Yep.
It's that whole idea that pop culture does affect our lives. Ours just happens to be currently through comic books, and some of these movies and things like that. So it's the same kind of concept. What affects you?
This is the same kind of concept, but with this one, this isn't just my own favorite. Probably my most. It's definitely my most read comic book story of all time, and it's definitely my favorite Transformers comic book of all time.
Oh, Transformers! There it is.
It's a little story called "The Last Stand of the Wreckers." I think I've honestly read not necessarily this specific hardcover, but definitely the individual issues. I just about did a quarterly reread of this story for years. This particular tale stars a little group of characters within the Transformers continuity, within the Transformers canon, called the Wreckers. The Wreckers themselves it's a Suicide Squad, basically. It's a bunch of characters that their entire mission is to get in, complete the mission, and most likely die trying.
Expendables.
They're the Expendables. They're not supposed to be the characters that ultimately are supposed to come out in the end. They're the last ditch effort dudes, the last guys that go, this is my last hurrah, or otherwise I'm screwed. I'm not going to be able to make a name for myself. So with that in mind, so a lot of the themes that are explored in this particular story are what it actually means to be a hero. You have a bunch of you have one character that he's always aspired to be a wrecker his entire life, even though he may not necessarily have the chops to do it because he's a historian at heart. But somehow he gets selected for these trips, for this particular trip. Come to find out, the reason why he was selected, he wanted to be a wrecker, and he had brain damage that was slowly eating away at him. So he makes it through the end of the story just to die at the end, within the
So
final couple chapters.
this is like the what is it, the Black Knight of the Watch,
Kind
in Game
of.
of Thrones or
Yeah.
something kind of thing. So these are
They're
not like Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, the ones that people mostly know.
No, if you did, there is one memorable character that everybody is going to know in this particular story. If you are a Transformers fan, if you are, you actually already probably know about this particular
More
team.
than meets the eye.
Exactly. If you grew up watching the 1986 Transformers movie, you probably remember a green character that transformed in both a car and a helicopter. That guy's name was Springer. Springer just so happens to be the leader of the Wrecker team.
Jerry?
What? Huh?
Jerry Spring?
Jerry Springer? No, no.
Okay.
So he by the end of the story, you think that he's going to die. He is the only one that actually legitimately, him and two other characters are the only ones that make it out of the 7 that are dropped into this prison. What they're supposed to do is save one particular character, gather up some files, blow the prison to smithereens, and maybe get out alive. That's the entire premise of this particular story. It's a get in, get out. It's a hard-nosed story. You're not going to have a whole lot of time with characters. But within the process, every one of the characters explores a different element of heroism and sacrifice. One character wants to go out in a blaze of glory, sacrificing himself to be able to say that this is what it means to be remembered within the halls of fame. And he gets his chance to go out in a blaze of glory for an absolutely meaningless gesture that he easily could have avoided. There's one character that he believes that he's invincible and can do anything, and is immediately thrown into the arena of the big bad of the story and is eviscerated.
What a drag.
What a drag. You think, well, these characters, like, why, Curtis, why would you like a story like this? Because by the end of it, the characters that do survive are the only characters that understand what it means to be a hero, are the only characters that understand that they're not doing this to be remembered. They're doing this so other people can survive and go on.
Oh, that's deep. That's deep.
You're like, this is 5 issues. This is a bunch of giant robots that are running around shooting at each other. Can't they all live? It's like, no, not within the context of this particular story. But it still does explore a very, very human element of, like what we do to sacrifice things that we love. Like, is it for the greater good of other people? Is it for our own personal initiative and our own sacrifice to better ourselves? So it's within these really, really simple elements within this story that I found a ton of meaning and a ton of understanding that, in all honesty, I could easily relate to through, the understanding of what it means to be a hero, and that sometimes it's not flashy. Sometimes it's rather gruesome. Sometimes you may not necessarily be remembered for it.
Right. Oh no, I agree. I mean, that alone kind of, I don't know, that could almost segue into this. We might go back and forth here a little bit, but that's almost like the whole idea of the parabolic reaction of how we can apply that today to even our own lives and stories. That Jesus, the disciples came to him and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" Jesus answered them, "To you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not yet been granted. For whoever has, to him more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has shall be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, while hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand." I love this concept of parables. And, we've talked a little bit about the stories. They're not, allegories falter and fail. I agree with you there. These are not all allegorical stories. Captain America is not a type of Christ, or there's particular stories where you can feel. I've been reading a book called Hollywood Heroes, and it talks about how Captain America or Lord of the Rings is the big one they break down, and how there's several different types of Christ that between Frodo and Samwise
Gandalf
and what was that?
and Gandalf.
And Gandalf and Aragorn, how they all can kind of go in and out, and each one portrays a different perspective of Christ. But an allegory fails in that it doesn't carry on throughout their life. You can't say it in every instance because it doesn't carry through. It's not like, it's the whole idea that this is a type of Christ. The order of Melchizedek from the Old Testament is referencing to a type of Christ, but it's not a full-on allegory. What was the term that you used, that it was more the
Applicable.
idea that it was more applicable? Exactly. So that's the parabolic reaction, how these stories relate to us. I could even quiz you right now.
Go ahead.
Quick stories from children's church. What are some quick Bible studies?
Quick
Stories that
Bible
you remember.
studies.
Stories
Oh,
that you remember.
my favorite book of the Bible has always been Job. Always been Job. That's always been my
Wow.
favorite story. I'm being
You're such a deep kid, man.
I'm such a
Wow.
deep kid. Well,
Wow.
I have to understand my own
That's a struggle for
faults.
so many people.
I have to
Job.
understand my own faults. Job goes through so much, pardon my language, shit in his life. He
Oh, he goes
gains a
through lots of
ton
it.
and he loses it all, and through it all, he remains faithful.
Well,
And
that's
in
funny
doing
because I
so,
remember,
gains twice fold what he once
yeah,
had. It's
twice
it's
fold.
it's a story that applies to myself. I've always applied this to myself. Look at what is behind me. I rely heavily upon what I've gained in life to show some level of accomplishment. To have that ripped down, this story very much has always kept me in perspective.
Well, yeah, and to remember, it's just things. It's just
Yeah.
things.
But
And,
still,
God will
it's a
supply all my what? God will supply all your
all my
what?
needs,
Needs, not your what?
wants.
Wants.
But
Exactly.
but I will say this specifically whenever it comes to the physicality, this is a type of comfort.
Well,
It
yeah,
is. It is.
that definitely.
That's what it is. So it's trying to divest myself from the ideas of why I collect what I do, and divesting the needs for why I do it, and giving that to something else.
This
Giving
is
that
good
to
because
God. That the whole idea of my collecting may spur some kind of impulse, but in reality, I know what I need, and I can find it elsewhere. I can find it through Christ. I can find it through God. So that story has always put things into perspective for myself, and I
mhm.
gotta keep always referring back to it. So
Well, you've always been that deep thinker where you pull the perspective similar to what we've been trying to do with this podcast. We can talk about the CDC and or the CCA, and we can CDC, Freudian slip there, a CCA. We can talk about these things of how they affected, but then apply it to our lives to see, okay, what's a lesson that we can learn? Because I remember even when you first came to me as a teenager and you were watching the zombie show. Oh my gosh, Walking Dead. It was originally a comic
oh
book, for those
yeah,
who didn't know. That The Walking Dead, and Curtis is like, it's not about zombies. It's not about zombies. It's all about
how
human
people hate each
nature.
other.
And what do we do when we're put in those situations? Are we truly good or are we truly bad? And I just thought, man, I just saw it as a show was about zombies. And you're like, no, it's not even about zombies. It just happens to take place in that type of situation. So I can see that now, how that relates with your storytelling of Job, growing up with that story. I mean, because we did, as a children's pastor, we did Daniel in the Lion's Den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, living in the fiery furnace. We've all grown up with these different stories. One of my favorites, obviously, was David and Goliath. The little man kicks the big man's butt.
You are the youngest
He's
son. You have an inferiority
yeah,
complex. I got it.
yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh, you had to spring. Well, David was the eighth son.
He was.
For
He
those of you who don't
was.
know, There are 10 children in my family, 2 girls, 8 boys. Guess who's the eighth son?
Oh,
This guy. So,
not this
yeah,
guy.
not that guy. My family, my brothers and sisters. Not he's only got a sister, and and a brother-in-law. And he's wonderful.
Who
They're
are
both
all lovely, by the way.
lovely. They're just lovely. That the whole idea that David and Goliath was, man, he was a little guy. He went, you how dare you speak about his Lord that way? Basically, just flung that rock, went over, picked up a sword, cut his head off. But I loved all the stories of David and Goliath because it was always this concept of David was actually appointed king way back when he was a teenager. And yet, so when he went against the bear and he went against the lion and he went against Goliath, he wasn't afraid because God was with him. But there was also that security that he had not yet fulfilled the prophecy that God had placed over him that he was to be king of Israel. So there was no fear. And I think about that, like, reading some of these stories and, you know, Daredevil, the man without fear. And even like I said, going back, and this kind of flip flops back and forth between comic book stories versus Bible stories, that it's consistent through all of it. Gideon was another one of my favorites. Do you remember Children's Church? And those who might be watching who have had their kids there as well, we had a giant, and I mean giant
Oh,
Bible,
the giant time Bible time machine.
the Bible time machine type of thing.
Yeah.
We'd wheel that thing out, and we had big dials on the front, so you could go to the scripture reference for the book of the Bible, chapter and verse, and we had all this machines going
Yep.
lights around it, and we pulled out characters out of the Bible, and so we would interview characters from the Bible. We would interview, I would keep wanting to call them Rack, Shack, and Benny, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from
I'm Rack. I'm Shack. I'm
VeggieTales,
Benny.
VeggieTales. Yeah. So, and my favorite one, see if you remember this one.
Mm.
I came out dressed up as Napoleon Dynamite,
Oh.
but as Gideon.
Yeah, I do remember
We
that.
we rewrote the script of Napoleon Dynamite, and Napoleon comes out, and so Gideon is dressed up. So I had this giant wig with the badge, with the big bandana across it, and I come out. What? I can't even do it now. But then the angel of the Lord we had him acting like he was Kip. Gideon, don't be jealous, but I've been up in heaven talking with God all day. And then we have Gideon going, "What have you been doing, Gideon? I've been stepping on the grapes. Oh, like, yeah." And I think, okay, so you think about these stories and you think, okay, these are just stories from a childhood. I went out to lunch with a parent, and this parent came and told me, and I don't know if I've shared this with you. This guy comes in, and he was from Boston, and he wanted to have lunch with me. He wanted to talk about the children's church that his son was being involved with, and it was great. He wanted to be able to talk to me what we're talking about, what we're sharing, and he said, "Well, my son really talks about the coffin that you bring in." And I was like, he was from Boston, so he had an accent. He said the coffin and the coffin, and I kept going, coughing. Somebody's sick, and he finally goes, a big black box, dead people, the coffin. And I said, coffin? He thought the giant black Bible that we had was the coffin, and we kept bringing dead people out of it from the past, from the Bible, and we were interviewing. But the kid loved it. He loved that this coffin was bringing about stories. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so funny, because you have no idea these stories that affect children. And as a pastor, you saw the routines. People grow up through high school and they go to college, and then they get swayed by other people's stories and by other people's language and how they interpret things. And then usually about 30s, they'll get married and start having kids, and then they want to start coming back. and they start bringing the kids again. Why? Because they remember the Bible says in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So to me, that was an absolute must to be sharing stories, to be sharing these, some people may call them tales, whether you're a believer or not. These storylines of Daniel in the lion's den show faith and strength, and Shadrach and Benny, Shadrach, I did it again, and David and Goliath is being able to stand before your enemies and making a stand. Or Zacchaeus, who was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up. I'm going to sing it all for you.
No, please don't. No.
That's right. Or
No.
Gideon himself going before the armies of the Lord and weeding it down to 300 men that he was able to defeat tens of thousands of the enemy. That to me is so encouraging, that stories have a part to play. And that is why Jesus uses parables, that we can relate with people. So even as Christians versus non-Christians, you want to find that connection point. And Bible stories, again, whether or not you believe in the full extent of it, whether or not you believe they were true, they still play an impact on a child's life because it gives them that faith, the encouragement, the strength that they know that they can make it through those things. Whether they think it's a coffin and dead people are coming out of it. But even, like I said, your storylines that you tell and you come and say, okay, Dad, it's not about zombies, it's about this. The storylines are there. And so I would encourage you not to look at all of these stories and say, well, they're not talking about God. They're not singing about God. They don't mention God by name or Jesus. Or the point is that we find that connection point, that we find that common ground, that we can say, okay, hey, we are all still human beings created by God. And that from there, hopefully you can become more of an influence, share the stories, you start with that commonality. And storylines are important. Sometimes people may come through and get upset, like Caseta, and change storylines, and it would wreck on them and just wipe them clean. And we're just like, oh, come on. Because that's the stories that we share and that we grew up with. So, I don't know if I'm necessarily making a lot of sense from here, but the whole idea is that we can connect no matter what your beliefs. So listen to your grandparents. Listen to your parents. They have great stories to tell. Awesome stories to share. Carry on that, as you could hear from our previous ones. Yeah, we love Star Wars, but I love the Star Wars of Legacies and how these stories carry on. It carries on a legacy. So it's much like that Star Wars comic that, 125 years later, the story is still there. The story is still important. So find that connection with each other. Find that connection with your kids. Find the connection with your grandparents. Share the stories, because that's what brings us all together, makes us human. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. Well,
amen,
hey,
Reverend.
We wanted to just share. Yeah, we just want to share some of our stories. One of my favorites is to know Lloyd Dobler is to love Lloyd Dobler. To love Lloyd Dobler is to know Lloyd Dobler. That's right. All right. Well, hey, guys, thanks for listening to our podcast.
He just had to get a Cusack reference.
I had to get another Cusack quote in there. I had it written down. Matt, that's for you. That's right. All right. Well, you guys, thanks for listening to our podcast. I'm Bill.
I'm Curtis.
And we are your
Geekdumb Prophets.
Catch you guys on the fly. Remember, perspective is either your prison or your passport.
Peace.
Peace out. Peace like a river. I just